job. Good job singing, guys. That's where we are starting the lesson today, which is why we did that as you were coming in. You missed last week, so we're going to try to catch you up. But 2 weeks ago, we stopped with the beautiful creation that God had made. It's an absolutely perfect world. But then, that sneaky little snake, sneaky little smile on his sneaky little face, came along and tempted Eve with the fruit so sweet. And she couldn't say no. She should have, shouldn't she? The devil comes to her in the form of a serpent and tells her to disobey God. Don't worry about what God said. That's not what he meant. It's going to be okay. She did it. The price she paid was really high because now there's evil in the world. And now they had to leave the Garden of Eden. And it was a sad, sad day when they had to leave there. Could no longer live there. Now they have to grow their own food and all kinds of consequences because of what we call sin, disobeying God. Now, the worst part of that is that because they sinned, their children grew up and sinned. Their grandchildren grew up and sinned. And eventually there were thousands and thousands of people in the world, and they were all sinners, just like us. But God had made a promise. Remember at the end of that song, it says, God will make it all right? He had told them that he would someday send a Savior. And we know that he did. They didn't know that. They didn't know how long it was going to take for that to happen. But they knew that God would keep his promise. So, now there's all kinds of evil people in the world. What happens next? If you look at our timeline, 1,500 years later, it's so evil that God says, I'm going to destroy the entire world and start over. But who was the one person who still followed God? No? Noah. Noah and his family. And so God in his love kept them safe inside that ark while the rest of the entire world was destroyed. Now they came out of the ark and God did start over. Now everybody is a child, a grandchild, or great-grandchild of Noah. And that worked out fairly well, except they were still sinners, weren't they? And God decided that he was going to take from that group of people, and he was going to choose a person. And we know him as Abraham. See where the stars are over there? Remember Abraham? God said, Abraham, I'm going to take you. I'm going to give you as many members of your family as the stars in the sky. And you're going to be a very special people to me. I'm going to do things for you and through you that I don't do anywhere else in the world. And you're going to show the whole world that I am God. One of the big problems of all these people was that they worshipped other gods. They thought there were other gods in the universe. And there aren't. He's the one true God. So he says, I'm going to take you and show the world that I'm it. Yes?
So since that God floated and the Noah's family were the only ones to survive, does that mean Adam and Eve died?
Yes, Adam and Eve would have died before that. Adam lived for 930 years, but there's 1,500 years between the creation and Noah. So yes, most of those people would have died. My guess is that Adam and Eve died and went to heaven, because I'm pretty sure they said sorry and asked God to forgive their sin. And I think when we go there, we'll get to meet them, shake their hands. But there were just a huge number of people who were evil, and so God destroyed the world. So now he takes Abraham, and Abraham, at the time God made that promise to him, he didn't have any children at all. Remember the story? We did this last year. Abraham didn't have any children. God said, I'm going to give you so many. But eventually, of course, God kept his promise, gave him a son, and then a grandson, and then great-grandsons. And one of those great-grandsons was Joseph. Remember Joseph with the coat of many colors? All right. So he's his father's favorite. He gives him the beautiful coat. His brothers don't like him. We figured that out, right? You wouldn't like it either if your brother or sister was the favorite. And so they sold him as a slave into what country? Where'd he go? Egypt. If you look at the map over here, this is where Egypt is. This is the area that God had given Abraham. He said, this is your land. Your family is going to live here. This is the land I promised you. However, Joseph is down here in Egypt. And if you remember the story, there's a famine, which means there wasn't enough food. And Joseph brought his entire family to Egypt. Now this would be Abraham's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Now they're all in Egypt. 70 of them went down there. And they lived there for 400 years. During those 400 years, they became a couple million people. Now is God making a great nation out of them? Oh yeah. There's a couple million of those people. And we pick up the story in the book of Exodus. Everything I've told you up to now is in Genesis. We looked at that last time you were here. Today I want you to go to Exodus. That little marker in the pink marker is your table of contents. Should be right in front of the book of Genesis. If you go to the next one, it's Exodus. And we want to be in chapter 3, verse 10. Okay, can you find chapter 3? Second book of the Bible, Exodus. Chapter 3. All right. This is, don't tell them page numbers, I want them to find it, okay? All right, just hold on to it. We're going to read it together after a while.
What chapter?
Chapter 3. Okay? All right, let me tell you the story. In the opening chapter of the book of Exodus, we meet a man named Moses. Now Moses wrote Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now if he wasn't born till Exodus, how could he write Genesis? Brethren,
Because God told him what to write.
because God told him what to write. Remember, the Bible is written by God. He's the one who inspires it. He tells him what to write. Okay, so in Exodus 1, God's people are in Egypt. And for a while, when Joseph was there, things went really well. They had good crops, they had animals, they lived really well. But then, the Pharaoh, who's the ruler in Egypt, decided there's way too many of them. I don't want that many foreign people living in my country. So he decided he was going to kill all the baby boys. Because if you get rid of all the boys, you only have women left. After a while, you're not going to have any children. You're not going to have any soldiers. And, who cares about a bunch of women? So he says, let's just get rid of all the guys. And they did. They took all the baby boys and threw them into the Nile. Now there was a mother who was going to have a baby, and of course she didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl. And when this baby was born, it was a boy. Think about how she must have felt like, oh no, they're going to take my baby. And so she hid him for 3 months. But you know and I know that you can't hide a baby very long. They don't know how to be quiet. They don't learn that for a long time. So they go, wah, a lot. And they're just noisy. And so she knew she couldn't hide him long. She hid him for 3 months. And then I'm sure that it was God that told her what to do with this baby, because this baby was important to God. All the babies were important. But God had a special job for this baby. And she made a basket, and she put her little baby in there, and she put him on the river, and she had her daughter Miriam watch to see what would happen. And you know what happened. Who came along and found the baby? The princess. The princess of Egypt. Now remember, her father is the one that says we got to get rid of all these babies. So she finds this baby in this basket. And she's probably like most of us women are. We see a baby and we go, oh, the boys are like, whatever. But most of us, we like babies. We like to hold them. And she saw this baby, and she wanted to take this baby home. I don't know if she thought about what her dad was going to say. She's bringing home a Hebrew baby. This is not an Egyptian baby. This is a Hebrew baby. Is he going to make her go throw it in the river? Well, he didn't. Maybe because, you girls, sometimes you can get your dads wrapped around your little finger and they'll do whatever you want. Well, she must have had the Pharaoh in the right place, because she was allowed to keep the baby. And there again, God was there, wasn't he? God was watching over this little baby, and she named him Moses. And so he grew up with the princes in the palace and had probably a pretty good life. They were rich, powerful people. And so he had a good life. Eventually, though, he noticed how the Egyptians were treating his people, the Hebrews. They had made them into slaves because they were afraid of them. And so he saw what happened, and he did something about it. He killed an Egyptian who was beating up on one of his family, one of his relatives. And when the Pharaoh found out, the Pharaoh's pretty angry. You know, I let my daughter adopt this kid, and now look what he's done. And so Moses knew that he was in trouble, so he ran away. And he stayed for 40 years out there, herding sheep. He found a family to live with, and they were shepherds, and so he watched sheep with them. One day while he's out there watching the sheep, he sees a bush that's burning. But it's not burning up. It's just burning. And it just keeps on burning. So he goes over there to find out what in the world is going on. And there's a voice. It says, Moses, take off your sandals. You're on holy ground. Who do you suppose that was? God. That was the voice of God, or Jesus, wasn't it? Okay? And so he did that. Moses knew he was in the presence of God. So he took off his sandals, and God said to him, and this is what God said in chapter 3, verse 10. Let's read it together. You ready? Chapter 3, verse 10. Come, I will send you
to Pharaoh, that he may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt.
All right. So God says, Moses, I'm going to send you back to Pharaoh. And Moses is probably like, whoa, Pharaoh's not real happy with me. I don't think I want to go back there. But God said, I'll be with you. I will take care of you. And Moses says, what if I get there and nobody believes me? Nobody believes that you have really sent me there to bring them out of Egypt. And God said, what's that in your hand? And Moses said, my staff. I use it all the time. It's how I walk around. It's how I take care of my sheep. Just my staff. God says, it's not just your staff. I want you to throw it down. He threw it down, and what happened to it? It became a snake. And Moses is probably like, whoa, I'd rather have my staff, right? But God says, pick it up, pick up the snake by the tail, and it became a staff again. Now, only God can do that, right? So if he goes to Egypt and does that, don't you think the people would believe him?
Oh, yeah.
I think I would believe him. I'd check out to make sure he's not just doing something to trick me, but I think I would believe him. But Moses said, well, what if they don't believe that? And God says, well, I have another sign that you can do. If they don't believe that I sent you, take your hand, put it inside your coat. And when you pull it out, it was all had a disease called leprosy on. That's a gross disease. It's runny and cruddy and red and that. And he said, that's what I want you to do. And then, after they all see this hand, put it back in your coat. And when you pull it out, it'll be just like new. And so that's the second miracle that you can do to show them that you really are sent by me. Do you think the people believed him?
No.
Do you think Moses went to do that?
Yeah.
Did he obey God and go?
Yes.
He did better than Adam and Eve? He actually obeyed? You're right. He did. And when he got there, he had to go to that Pharaoh and talk to him. And you know what? We'll tell you all about that next week.
Whoa!
I know.
I wanna
Stop
go
at the story. Well, you can read it. Read it in your
This
Bible.
Bible has no marks in it.
Okay, you give it to Mr. Ron.